Uncharted waters. So beautiful and evocative and so full of promise these words are. When I look back on my life, a lot of my life can and does fit this theme of uncharted waters. I write poetry, not prose. You'll be amazed at the number of people who've told me to write prose. They tell me prose is where the money is, but poetry is where my soul is, so there's not much of a choice for me. I prioritized academics over everything else, choosing to pursue a PhD in English literature. I chose to pursue a PhD in English literature, not linguistics, which is the more common choice. I chose to pursue a PhD in an Indian writer, a controversial contemporary writer called Salman Rushdie. My PhD is in the image of women in the novels of Salman Rushdie. Post-PhD, I have shunned the so-called regular, normal existence of a college or a university kind of a life, choosing instead this kind of bohemian life where I train students for aptitude exams like the CAT and the GRE and so on. So there is the regularity of a regular paycheck that I miss, but on the other hand, every new day is filled with possibilities. Yesterday I was in class, today I'm here at TEDxGCT, so it's always exciting when you're a freelance consultant. So in my time with you today, you could probably divide my talk into 3 parts. You could call it poetry, teaching, and a segment that I call takeaway. But I'm hoping that you don't do any of these things, because I work best in spontaneous situations. I write best in the heat of the moment. So let's just say that for the next 17 odd minutes that I'm there with you today, I'm going to be talking about these 3 themes. So here is my radical idea. I believe that behind every single thing that inspires us is a word or a series of words. It could be a movie scene, it could be a fight scene, it could be a thrilling car sequence. Remember the long dialogue in V for Vendetta, which was full of V's? It's actually a very, very simple concept, but it's spoken so eloquently and beautifully, you think it's mesmerizing. So the idea for me is that behind every single thing are a series of words. Henry Ward Beecher says that all words are pegs on which we hang our ideas, and I think it's so completely true. So think back, if you will, to the time of the Arab Spring or the protests after the Delhi gang rape. People weren't just protesting, people didn't just take to the streets, they were holding placards. They were saying, don't just look at us, read what we have to say, because we have to say something. Yes, words are very, very powerful, and this need to communicate is at the heart of who we are. It's absolutely intrinsic to who we are. So much so that we start communicating even before we are born. For instance, an expectant mother will find every way possible to communicate with her unborn child. And when the child responds to the mother's lullaby or the father's booming laughter, there's a lot of rejoicing. Or perhaps, maybe one of these days when you're bored in your hostel, you pull out that Ojha board, which you're not supposed to do, and you try and call the spirits to ask them whether you'll pass in an exam that you haven't really prepared for. Or maybe you conduct seances and try and communicate with some ancestors you thought were fascinating. Or perhaps you listen to a child speaking absolute gibberish and you're fascinated because you're thinking, what the hell is this child trying to say to me? And when the child finally communicates, you're absolutely ecstatic because you think, finally, this little girl is making words. The success of social media sites like Facebook and Twitter are based on this need for us to touch base with each other, for us to connect with each other. And what do you use to connect with each other on Facebook and Twitter and all these things? Perhaps a picture, yes. Maybe a video, yes. But more often than not, they are words. Sometimes not very original words, but they are words nonetheless. So words are very, very powerful. In my own case, I have been inspired by words at a very young age. I think I was 5 years old when I discovered reading. I was brought up in an atypical family by an Air Force officer father and an educationist mother who taught by example the importance of reading. It's very, very normal in my household to be asked, if you're not a reader, what are you? And my father, who would never have money for toys or dolls, always had money for books. So it became very, very simple for me to understand early on in my life that books were important and toys and dolls were not. And then I have a sister who always bought me books for my birthday, a practice that she continues to this day. Of course, it's not books on my birthday alone. I demand books from her on any occasion. I've been here on a TEDx talk. I'm going to go back home and give her a call, and she'll have to send me some books. So books became very important. So much so that I'm reminded of what Jorge Luis Borges, the Argentinian writer, says. He says that I always imagine paradise to be a kind of library, and I think that's so true. And so when I hear of my reputation among my students of being the crazy book lady, I'm not surprised at all. I feel I have decades of practice. What else can I be but the crazy book lady? I think I was 7 years old when I started writing poetry. If you need a frame of reference, this was the time when my math teacher gave up on me completely, and my English teacher, I think, was a little more optimistic about my possibilities in the world. Believe me, I would love to forget my early versions of my poetry, of my creative genius. But when you have a mother like mine who likes to save every scrap of your writing and your scribbling, it's very hard to live your earlier reputation down. So forever will my name be associated with such gems like my uncle is thin and looks like a pin, or he has a mustache that looks like a sash. You can see, right, where I'm going with this. It was so important to rhyme, and when I did rhyme, I was so excited, like I had achieved something. 700 poems later, my work has featured in anthologies of Indian writing. 2 months ago on the 16th, thank you. 2 months ago on the 16th of December, I launched my first solo book of poetry. I still don't know if I've gotten it. I don't know if I've moved away from that little girl who says, my uncle is thin and looks like a pin. So when people ask me, why do you write poetry? I really don't have an answer. I write poetry because it is a compulsion. I have to do it, so I do it. And so I'm going to borrow my favorite writer, Salman Rushdie's words here. He says, the work of a poet's work is to name the unnameable, to point out frauds, to take sides, to start arguments, to shape the world, and stop it going to sleep. My poetry is not something that you would read and say, I enjoyed reading what you wrote. You would probably get back to me and say, it disturbed me, it made me uncomfortable, it upset me, it got me to think, all of which I'm completely okay with. I would be unhappy if you said, you know what, I forgot your poetry. If you're indifferent to it, it would be insulting to me. Because my poetry talks about serious themes. It talks about incest, it talks about child abuse, it talks about rape, it talks about the plight of women. It also talks about happy stuff, but it's the darkness of life that my poetry talks about more, and I think these things are important. So there's poetry and there's teaching in my life. And when I walk into teaching, I want to talk a little bit about being that child who wrote this nonsense verse and then showed it to everybody completely proud, like I had achieved something. It didn't matter that it was rubbish. I was just so happy sharing it with people. And you know how we are. We show people, when children show us their work, even if it's complete rubbish, we say, how nice. Nobody told me, except maybe my father, no one told me, why don't you study mathematics? God knows you need help. They just said, this is lovely, why don't you go write? And off I was again with my pencil and paper, trying to write more poetry. It's so sad that as we grow older, we lose this ability to make fools of ourselves if we can learn more. For instance, when I teach verbal ability, when I handle a first class, I ask students if they speak this language at all. And they tell me they don't, and then they proceed to give me excuses. They are excuses, they're not reasons for why they don't speak this language. Some of my most entertaining ones are, ma'am, English is a slave language. It was used to enslave us, and when we speak it, we become slaves again. Or, ma'am, there is no need to speak English. When there is a need, I will speak it miraculously. Or, ma'am, I have not had to speak English all my life. Why do I have to start today? When it comes to speaking this language, we become typical Indians. We learn how to adjust. We make up our own words, so much so that the original word is all but forgotten. So if you'll permit me, I want to give you a few words that I'm sure you'll know. Head weight. Have you heard this word? You might know it more from the context of Peter or Banda, or last year a student taught me scene. Have you heard this word? I always thought scene was a part of a movie, but apparently for young students, a scene is a person who actually shows off. Or maybe gym body. Have you heard this word? This poor guy goes to the gym, works out, is physically fit, is muscular, is sinewy, and what do? We compare him to a building, and we say, he has a gym body. Or have you heard cycle gap? It's one of my favorites. You mean a narrow escape. You mean an escape as thin as that of a cycle. So narrow escape, proverbial escape, escape by the skin of your teeth. You leave everything else and come up with cycle gap because it makes instant sense. But none of these are colloquialisms. None of them I am more entertained by than homely girl. Have you heard this one? If you've heard homely girl, it means you watch too many movies. That's what it means. I heard homely girl in a classroom 7 years ago, where a student used this to introduce his friend. He said, this is my friend, he's from so-and-so college, he wants to marry a homely girl. And I said, what? He said, homely girl. He thought I couldn't hear him. I said, no, I can hear you. What do you mean he wants to marry a homely girl? And homely girl is one who does not look like you, ma'am, he said. I said, good job. But in the dictionary, the word homely only means plain, unattractive, simple. So while that kid was trying to insult me, it kind of worked like a backhand compliment. So sad for him. But if you look at the matrimonials, boys are still looking for tall, fair, convent-educated, homely girls. It's not a right word, and that's the problem with using a substitute word. You often make mistakes. So while these are great words, let's try some actual words for a change. For instance, I notice a lot of the men today are wearing shoes. And if you notice, in your shoelace is a little plastic coating that keeps your shoelace from opening. Do you know that that plastic coating has a word? It's called an aglet. And that little metal disc from which your shoelace emerges from your shoe is called a grommet. And when you punch paper, your punching machine has a little plastic portion in which that punched out paper is saved. That little punched out paper that you throw into the rubbish bin is called a chad. And you can measure pain. I'm sure my students feel it when they attend my vocabulary class. In measurements called dols, D-O-L. And you can measure how warm your clothes keep you in claws or togs. And the fragrance of rain is not mud smell, it's petrichor. And if you fear long words, then you have a phobia. You suffer from hippopotomonsterosesquiped allophobia. I think it's a very mean word, right? If you suffer from it, you can't even tell people what you suffer from. I think if you suffer from the fear of long words should be a very short word, so that you can tell people that you're actually scared of it. But the fun, so this is the fun of vocabulary for me. The fun with vocabulary is when I notice that words are connected. And when words are connected, it's easier for me to understand them. Words have stories. It could be anything. Or words have roots with which I connect them, and that's how I teach them also. Besides, forget all the big words. Like Pythagoras says, it's the oldest and the smallest words, like yes and no, that will take you the most time to put across. So now I've talked for so long. I've talked about poetry, I've talked about teaching, and you're thinking, yeah, well, this is all very well. What is in it for me? What's my takeaway? Do I need to be a poet or a trainer to understand or appreciate the language? Of course not. You don't even need to appreciate poetry if you don't want to, but you do have to use the words. You do have to use this language, and not just use the language, you have to use it well. So here is my takeaway. My takeaway is that words complete the package. You could be an engineering student, you could be an astronaut, you could be an independent consultant of some sort, but words will always be at the core of who you are. Words will communicate to people that you are somebody of substance. They will make people feel that you should be taken seriously, and words are these very powerful tools. I read somewhere that in the hands of an artist, words are weapons of mass destruction. So this is a very powerful tool you have in your hand. You can make whatever you want out of it. You can write a poem if you want. You can create an original status update, not just cut, copy, paste, which is a terrible, terrible thing. Or you could write a great introductory email. You could create a powerful resume. You could write your own statements of purpose instead of paying somebody to do something. You could create something that is your own. You could write a book. God knows enough and more people are tasting commercial success with very little or very simple storytelling ability. So if this world of words is the uncharted waters for you, then remember that it is your world and it's completely new to you, which means it's your world, open to your exploration. You set the pace, you set the direction, you create the route map, you set your compass, and you let go. So isn't that amazing? Because it's full of possibility and you don't have to listen to anybody else except yourself. And every single day is a day filled with possibility. So this is my world of words, and I'm very happy that you came along for the ride. And I feel that if you can put yourself in that position, you can learn these words also. When you have words at your disposal, you will create something original and you will take pride in it. Then we will move away from this culture that we seem to inhabit, which is taking stuff from the internet and passing it off as our own. Smart work is not an excuse for deception, because when it's plagiarism, it is deception. And we need to be a culture and a country that prides ourselves on original work. I believe that if you can put yourself in a position where you're learning every single day, you will learn a lot about yourself as well. And I think the voyage of self-discovery is the greatest journey that you can ever go on. So I wish you best of luck in this journey. I hope you have an exciting time, and I hope you learn something new every single day. Thank you very much.